Hello everyone, welcome to episode 86 of the ITSM crowd. This is Governance Returns with Peter Brooks. So we did an earlier episode back in 2020 about governance, which was really popular. Seemed to be a topic that kind of intrigued people and certainly taught them some things that they didn't know. So at the time, we were talking about some changes to the governance standard. We were talking about bringing Peter back anyway. So we've taken the opportunity to have him join us again. So Peter, I'm going to start by asking you to introduce yourself, please. Tell us a little bit about your background and your role in the governance world.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. It's good to be here again. And it's, again, as we were just talking about earlier, interesting to be online so much these days, making the world seem a smaller, closer place. But yes, I've been involved with service management for a bit over 20 years. Well, officially, I was involved in managing services 15 years before that, but I didn't know that was what it was called. And I wish I'd had the advice then. I mean, if ITIL had been around in 1980, and well, it was, but I didn't know about it. If I had the stuff there, it would have made life so much easier for me. But yes, I've got involved in governance really as part of the process of using service management and recognizing how if you don't work top down, I mean, it sounds a bit brutal, but frankly, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. If you try, you could make some headway. You can go some way if you start bottom up in your team and saying, let's try and do everything properly and encourage the rest of the organization to work with us. But ultimately, even with the most enthusiastic and able champion, the opposition builds and eventually it runs out of steam. Whereas top down, and this is where I think it started when I went to, we had 3 months working in Seoul for Samsung Semiconductor, and I was helping them with their service management project. And the chairman of Samsung had said, we are working with world standards and we're going to be using ITIL as a standard for our services. And it was a different world with everybody saying, this is the policy, this is what we're going to do. So not why does it say this, or shouldn't we be, or can't we do it this way, but saying, well, we do it this way now, how can we migrate to be able to do it that way? What would make sense? And being delighted when they could see that it wasn't just what they were ordered to do, it was actually practically useful. And I became more and more interested in the responsibility of governance. And of course, in South Africa, there was the huge move of the King Commission to embed governance, proper corporate governance, into organizations. And lots of the really crucial things that I felt were missing were coming up as being part of governance with King 2. And in the UK, the Roundtree Commission was making the same points. And that's why now I'm delighted that the new ISO standard, and it's taking longer than we expected, but
don't they always?
But we expected it to take longer, so maybe it didn't. But it's really good to see right there in the main diagram at the front of the book, sustainability, social responsibility, ethical behavior, and the recognition at the beginning that organizations exist for the benefit of people. They're not there to make money, the benefit of stakeholders. But yeah, that's how I got involved in it all.
Fantastic, thank you. And for those of you that are watching this episode while we're live on YouTube, you can ask Peter questions as well. So if there's anything while you're watching the episode that you think, oh, I'd love to know a bit more about this, pop it into the YouTube chat. We can bring it up on screen and we'll pick it up while we're live. So just be aware of that. My name's Claire Agata. I'm the host for today's session, and we are going to be purely talking governance. So we did this last time, Peter, but it's nice just for people who haven't seen the previous episode. when we say governance, define it, because I do always feel like it's such a misunderstood term that just gets thrown in at the beginning, a bit of governance and strategy, and then we're straight into doing things. So what does governance mean?
Well, I agree, and it's unfortunate that there are really two meanings for it. So the best way to start is to say the meaning that I'm not meaning. Governance is often used in things like project management to mean admin, really. Looking after the metrics, measuring this, making sure you've complied with the health and safety stuff. And they say when we do governance, you just do that admin bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's understandable why it's come to mean that, because the way corporate governance, and that's what we're really talking about, corporate governance works, is its job is to run the whole show. Its job is to make sure that the organization as a whole operates, as we say now in modern governance, it operates in order to produce value responsibly for its stakeholders. Mm-hmm. That's what its job is. But the way it does that job is not day-to-day management. Day-to-day management, well, they come into the office, they're there, they get this person to do that, they have these goals, they have those objectives, they do all the stuff of management, which is about making tactical decisions and some strategic decisions, but decisions that are all about what you're going to do in order to achieve what the organization is trying to do. Mm-hmm. Whereas governance is saying, this is what we are trying to achieve. Governance is deciding on the value that the organization is trying to create, and it does it by creating policies and then monitoring how well those policies are being used. And so people who are 2 levels or 3 levels down in the organization don't see the board making decisions about direction and understanding what the organization should be doing as a whole. They just see the policy coming down. So they think, oh, governments are just making sure we do these policies. And some of them are really boring things. I mean, to do health and safety, but who's going to get excited about that? And so they miss the point that it's the real guidance of the organization that's happening. And often people see someone like the CEO as running the whole show, not realizing that CEO is reporting to the board, and everything the board is wanting is what the CEO is managing. And the CEO is really, the hands and eyes of the board operating in the organization. Often, if not always, the CEO is on the board as well as a director, but doesn't have to be. But as a director, it's as the other term that before CEO became popular, the term was managing director. So a director who manages. Yeah. And the CEO is really the modern form of a director who manages, which means an unusual director who doesn't just direct and say, this is where we're trying to go and this is how we're trying to do it, but goes down to the day-to-day things of making it happen. So governance is enabling management to move in the right direction, making sure it does the right things, and it's governance that's ultimately accountable for what happens. If something goes wrong in an organization, it is governance job to make sure that there's a policy to stop that. And in modern terms, one of the really big things that governance is accountable for is the culture of the organization.
Yes.
So culture is part of social responsibility because one of the major stakeholders is employees. And an organization has got a responsibility to create value for its employees. So the old-fashioned view that you employees are just paid their money and then they're slaves, and that's just not it. An organization needs to be nurturing of its employees, and concerns like diversity are absolutely part of the board's responsibility. There was a good article actually put up on Back to ITSM recently about neurodiversity, how it's important for organizations to make sure that they don't just hire neurotypical people who work in neurotypical ways, but are aware of the value that can be brought by people whose minds do operate differently.
Yes.
And all that picture of diversity and diversity of different peoples and ethnicity and all that, those are all crucial parts of governance. Governance is there to form the personality of the organization. And the other word that I love that's right at the top of defining what governance is stewardship. The board are stewards of the organization. And in the old days, that a steward used to be the person on a farm who would look after everything on the farm when the owner was away.
Yes.
So somebody who could stand in and do everything. So the owner stakeholders, being the shareholders, give the job of making sure everything is done properly and ethically for everybody, the social responsibility to the board. And it may not be one board of directors, it's the governing body that may be a number of different people, but is the overall governing body. So yeah, it's the stewardship of the organization. It's the bit that directs. It's not the bit that manages. And what other really crucial point is it about? Well, it is accountable. If you want to know why an organization has done something, for example, when something gone badly wrong, like, I don't know, the Max Boeing crisis,
yes,
you can't blame individuals. The accountability for that rests entirely on the board. If the organization's gone in the wrong direction, done the wrong thing, it was their job to pull it back and put it on the right track. And I mean, that was a massive disaster because it got in the way of sustainability and social responsibility and all the rest of it. And just to finish on that last thing, the other crucial part of governance is that sustainability doesn't just mean ticking the box of doing nice things to the environment or having a green logo. I mean, some organizations thought that, nice green logo, a little flower, and off we can carry on what we were doing before. The definition of sustainability is using resources in a way that does not in any way impact the possibility of future generations using them. So what you're doing is whenever you're doing something, thinking, what I'm doing going to enable children and grandchildren to benefit from the same resources? And if the answer is no, you're doing the wrong thing. Sorry.
I was going to say, do you see different attitudes to governance around the world? So different countries, different cultures. Does governance kind of generally mean the same thing, or is it very different in some countries?
Definitely, it's very different, and definitely it is a process of change, where old attitudes are being replaced with new ones, and some countries are moving more quickly than others. I think part of the thing is that as we are recognizing, humanity as a whole is recognizing that companies are our servants. They are there to do what we human beings want them to do, not the other way around. We are not slaves to the machine, or shouldn't be. People are adopting modern governance, all the things I'm talking about. But in some areas where social responsibility has not been understood in the same way, there's still very old-fashioned Victorian-type views. There's still people who will tell you one of the great fallacies, that a company is there to make a profit for its shareholders. That is not true. One of the things, one of the many responsibilities it has is to shareholders who are owner stakeholders, but it's only one. And if it does that at the expense of humanity, if it's doing the wrong thing, something that generally is going to make the world a less livable place for the future generations, it shouldn't exist as a company. And so there are still retrograde companies. There are companies operating badly. The other important point is corruption. One of the crucial things for governance is to prevent corruption. And corruption isn't just people giving envelopes of banknotes to policemen, which lots of people think it is. If it isn't actual banknotes being handed over, bribes, it isn't corruption. But corruption is any use of your position for your own personal benefit. So a board of directors has got power over the company. If they use that power for their own personal benefit, that's corruption. If they allow managers to practice nepotism, and employ their family, that's corruption. That's why it can be difficult in non-Western countries, because Western countries have got a very, they call it weird, a Western view of the world, which is very individualistic, where we immediately understand nepotism to be corruption. In countries that are more socially cohesive, less individualistic, more concerned with the greater good, it's not seen quite the same way, because the natural thing you will do if you have any position is to help your relatives. That's what, one of your things is. So there's an element of tension there. And even in places where nepotism is right, the understanding that there are limits to it. It's fair enough to help your relatives, but not fair enough to disadvantage people who would be equally good or better at doing the job. I mean, if they're two equally good candidates and you choose your brother and they really are equally good, that's just not very good. But if you choose the worst candidate, your brother, against one that's much better, that's definitely corruption. And it can be more difficult in those countries. So Western, Northern European type countries, the UK, Germany, Scandinavia, these are the countries where I think it's more, what would you call it, Protestant countries, really, not countries, where this attitude of individualism exists with an attitude of social responsibility, where you historically have the Protestant work ethic, but you haven't got the social responsibility ethic. There you have the idea that a company can do no wrong. As long as it's making a profit for its shareholders, it can trample over anything. And modern governance is 100% against that, but it's going to take time to move from one to the other.
And I think in any conversation at the moment, we have to talk about the last 12 months and the impact of that on every area of our lives. But talking about the corruption and just thinking perhaps from the example of maybe some of the way that the contracts have been awarded in the UK, the excuse of the need for speed, the networks that have been used. What's the impact of the last 12 months been from a governance perspective?
Well, I think it's been massive in that there's been lots of negative things, obviously, and you mentioned a few of them. And the notion that when times are difficult, you don't have proper oversight is obviously completely wrong. When times are difficult and there's an emergency, there's even more need for oversight because times are uncertain and you need to be more careful. So I think that excuse, it's a crisis, so we're going to allow some corrupt decision, is absolutely wrong. If it's a crisis, you should say, we know things are complicated and difficult, so you're going to be paying particular attention to our social responsibility, to our sustainability, and to our ethics. So I think what happened there is quite wrong, and that's a bad thing. But on the positive side, I think it's opened the eyes of lots of people in governing positions to how much risk everybody was taking without realizing it. Those extended supply lines, the just-in-time manufacturing, thinking, well, we can get parts from China or Japan within 10 hours, 18 hours. We can keep such small inventories that, these things can just be shipped in, and we can rely on those supply chains. That simply isn't true. That everybody was living at a fallacy. And I think that the idea of sustainability applies to that as well. Having extended supply lines is bad for the environment because it costs a lot of money to ship this stuff around, but also bad for local communities because you're as an organization, one of the stakeholders are people living nearby. If you're always shipping goods from abroad, you're not using local manufacturing. And if you're not doing that, you're not being sustainable to your organization. There's no point in having a company that employs 3 people in a city with all the work taking place in another country, when the work could be putting life into the city. And I think that's one of the great things too that's coming out about putting life back into the cities, is the rethinking of what business premises are for.
Yes.
Yes, it's important for people sometimes to meet together face to face, though we're understanding how well we can survive, not thrive, but survive without that. But the whole idea of having the whole city center filled with shops is not sustainable, because we've known that before. We've known that out of town supermarkets and delivery and so on were eating away at it. But this has really allowed us to see how profoundly changed everything was. And I think moves of companies to turn high streets into places where people can live, into places where old business premises can be gyms, entertainment places, places for people to congregate, is brilliant. And one of the great ones is Marks and Spencer's in Marble Arch. I don't know if you read about that.
No.
They had a huge flagship shop with, I don't know, 6 floors of M&S that was a brilliant idea years ago, as something that the director who pushed for it said, I know it may never make a profit, but it makes a statement of what we stand for, which is how it was built. Well, it did make a big profit, but recently, of course, who goes to Marble Arch to go into a huge department store? And so they're redeveloping the site, which is quite a radical thing, you know, considering the history of it, to have a much smaller retail presence and start having more people-orientated activities going on the other floors. And I think that kind of rethinking, realizing that things that were changing slowly now need to be rethought completely, is a very positive things that come out of it. And being able to think again more clearly about our stakeholders, because as we were talking about before, in the old days, you'd think you'd have to travel to another country to meet people who were stakeholders for something, and all of the expense and the time and so on involved, we now realize is seldom necessary. We could do a lot of the stuff at home. And also, whilst we're understanding the local community is more important, we can also feel closer to remote communities. And this, I think, helps with sustainability, because we realize now that making decisions about offshoring dirty industry to India, say, are going to be affecting negatively people that we are now talking to at conferences, because we become much closer because of being able to work online. So it's perverse in a way that some of the negative effects have been positive, and some of the apparently positive effects have been negative. But I think that the great thing is that forced change is painful, but if you can take it in its best way, it can be a very powerful way of doing things better. You know, we know about digital transformation and disruptors. We've had the biggest disruptor possible, and it would be a tragedy not to use that to rethink our governance to do things better. And I think a lot of people are doing it, definitely.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I think, you know, we're saying virtual is global for the online event that we're running, and that's absolutely it. So I guess, you know, for the director at Marks and Spencer's, the director of any company right now, from a kind of a who governs the governor's perspective, where are they looking for guidance? So that the standard for governance is being developed, is that something that can help them rethink the approach for their organisation? Because everybody's going through this process of change, and it's helpful to be able to say, here's somewhere where you can get some good ideas. Where should people look?
I agree. I think when the standard comes out, and I'm hoping it'll be more the third quarter of this year rather than the end of the year. But when it comes out, I think it's got quite a few benefits in it. It's an international standard, and it reflects, for example, in talking about ethical behavior, it is understanding that that's not just a local matter that you can decide. You need to think about international norms of ethical behavior. And because it's international, it means that an organization can operate in different countries to the same standard of governance and not need necessarily to work to the lowest common denominator of where they are. by appeal to this. However, having said all of that, it's still true that though I really think this governance standard is brilliant, there's almost nothing in it that we don't know already. It's not a radical change. We've always known, or we've been getting to understand, that sustainability is crucial. You can't be wrecking the world for future generations. Whatever your company is, that's the wrong way of going. And you need to think about it with everything you're doing. I think we know this just from the recent decision. It was made in France a couple of years ago, but it's happening in the UK, where it'll be illegal to sell goods you can't repair. I mean, that is an enormous step forward for sustainability. So you should be able to keep your washing machine for 20 years, getting new parts, having people repair it. And I think having people repair it rather than throw away is also really good for social responsibility, because it means there are going to be many more jobs for people who can be good at repairing equipment. I also think it's brilliant in terms of governance sustainability, in that everybody has to now rethink the design of things like washing machines, so they are no longer have that built-in obsolescence. And if they do it properly, they can rethink them in terms of modern materials, 3D printing. If you're going to provide supplies, you don't have to have a huge warehouse full of spares. You can allow the person going to repair it to print out the particular piece that's required with 3D printing. So being able to think that way and think in terms of doing that, and making the design work in ways that knit together the notion of social responsibility, the notion of sustainability, along with modern technology, allows really, it should enable a revolution in the design of domestic equipment, so that it's probably much more reliable, because reliability is the best solution. Maintainability, I mean, being able to repair stuff is important, but it's much better that the stuff doesn't need repairing in the first place.
Yep.
And improving designs, because with programmed obsolescence, there wasn't the incentive to stop things breaking. With proper sustainable design, there is. You want to design things so they run forever, and if anything starts to wear out, there's a way to replace it. And I see the implication of that as huge. We were chatting about it online, and somebody was saying, "Oh well, buy your kit now while it's cheap, because it'll get more expensive." Which I think is a very bleak way of looking at it,
isn't it?
Some companies may well try and rip everybody off and say, "Here's our new improved sustainable one costing twice as much." But we as consumers can just say, no, we're not going to buy that one. We want to buy a nice, cheap, cheerful one that's been properly redesigned from scratch, with sustainability in charge, social responsibility, so that it can be repaired in the community, and also sustainability concerns that you're not flying in spares from China. I mean, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And similarly, with what we've learned from the lockdown, there's so many things where we've had a fixed view that that's the way to do things. And we're talking about traveling. It's almost been it has been a habit. Oh, we need to do X. Well, we'll go and meet together there, and we'll fly there. And all of the hassle we go through, we just have assumed as what we have to do. And it should be the exception. Oh, well, now maybe we'll have to go there for a particular reason, rather than just assuming it. And I think this overturning of assumptions is also something that can be really powerful over the next few years, if we grasp it, and if governing bodies see it for the opportunity it is, rather than how do we get back to where we were.
Yes.
So much of where we were, we thought was fine, but we were wrong, actually. We misunderstood a lot of things.
Yeah, I really hope so. So we've come to the end of the half hour. It has flown, as always. Where can people learn a bit more about you? Have you got any books you want to promote, or a website, anything that you'd like people to kind of contact you through?
Well, my books are all on my Amazon page, amazon.com. Peter Brooks, I think, is a place to go. And that's probably the easiest way to get in touch if people want to. It's got all my details there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And your book about consultancy is one that I always recommend.
Well, thank you very much. And Well, I was really delighted to produce that because, as I think I've mentioned before, when I started doing consultancy internally and externally, there were so many things that nobody told me that I had to find out the hard way. And what I was trying to do in that book is to say, if I was to start again, what would I like a book to tell me? And that's what I put in the book. This is what you're going to need to know practically in order to thrive. And when I wrote it, which is some time ago, I was already trying to put the notions of responsibility, ethical behavior, sustainability into it. Because I think as a consultant, as we've just been discussing, all these ideas about how to re-engineer the world to be better from a human perspective, more sustainable, and for companies to be looking after future generations, not this generation, that's a huge challenge for consultants to be able to work with organizations that have been, because big organizations find it difficult to move, to help them to be more agile. And oh, by the way, agile is a word that actually appears in the standard as
excellent
for organizations, not just for IT stuff, but for organizations should be more agile. So I think that's also quite a good thing.
Well, I suspect we will be bringing you back later this year for part 3, and hopefully the standard will be with us by then as well. The next episode of the ITSM Crowd is going to be on April 14th, and we're going to be joined by some of the team from NHS Digital. So Sally Bogg and some of her team are going to join us and talk about some of the lessons that they've learned in the last 12 months and the response that they had to make during COVID, the changes that they had to make. So that should be a really, really interesting one as well. Peter, thank you so much for being with us. It's been an absolute joy as always. And for everybody else, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of the ITSM Crowd.
Thank you very much. Bye.